Hello everyone. It's been a long time since our last session. We were talking about loops. Today we are going to talk about string manipulations, and I suggest us to get started right away. So as I mentioned before, today we are going to talk about string manipulations. We are going to talk about what are actually strings, how to create them, what operations we are going to do with them, such as concatenation, repetition, index slicing. We are going to speak about common methods. We are going to see the difference between format and f strings. Also, we are going to talk about multi-line strings in Python. We will mention what encoding is in terms of, and there would be more interesting techniques that we are going to cover, and obviously interesting exercises as always. So before we continue, I would like to remind you that this notebook will be added in the description of the video, so you can have a look at this again later, etc. You can play around with different Markdown, different Python cells to change the flowcharts, to try to run your code, to change the given code, etc. So let's start with reviewing our previous lessons. So we were talking about for and while loops, and for the beginning, I suggest us to have a look at this very simple problem, which asks us to what? To write a program to find the sum of all digits in a given number. We are assuming that the number given is what? Is integer, and we are going to iterate through integers only. So let's see what would be the solution. For writing solution, I suggest us to have a look at the flowchart and to the algorithm that we would use to solve this problem. We would have a look if the number, if our current given number is larger than 0, then what we would do? We would get the last digit of this number. In case if this digit is odd, we would do what? We would add this digit to total of all of the odd digits that we have. And then we would remove the last digit, meaning we would be moving to the next digit from the right in our number. And we would continue doing it until our number is not 0 anymore, and we would print total value. Afterwards, we are leaving them. Now, I suggest us to write down this solution. So the first thing that we need to do is obviously to create a variable total that we would assign to 0 in the beginning, because we don't know what sum is equal to. And we are going to loop it while our number is larger than 0. So as I mentioned before, let's get the last digit from the number by doing what? By finding the remainder from dividing by 10. And we are going to check if our digit is not digit. We are going to update our value of total. How would we do it? We would say plus equal the digit. That's pretty much all. The last thing that we just need to get rid of the last digit in our number. How we are saying? We are dividing it by 10. Let me just quickly remind you, it is the same thing as saying number divided by 10. Let's have a look. Print of the odd digits. Now we did not save it. Given number is going to be, let's run our code. Let's enter what number we're going to use. 1, 2, 3. So output should be equal to 4, which is correct in our case. Perfect. Now we can move to the next step. So again, what are actually strings? Strings is sequence of some characters. It could be anything. It can be a letter, it can be a digit, it can be some specific symbol. And as you can see, it can represent absolutely anything. A name, a message, address, etc. There are two different ways how we can create strings here. Some of you could notice that single string is used here, single quote and double quotation mark are used here. So let's talk about how we actually can create strings. So since we mentioned different ways of writing strings down in Python, let's talk how we can create them. We can use single quotation mark or double quotation mark, or we can use triple quotes to create multi-line strings, as in the example. Now let's talk about operations. So we know that with integers, with floats, we can use operation plus. What does it give us? It would just give us the sum of these two numbers. In case if we are going to work with strings, the output of adding two strings together would give us the merged value. We spoke about this during the first lesson, but now we are just going to quickly refresh this memory. This operation, we remember, it is called concatenation. Now, as we mentioned before, we can use not just plus and plus, we can use plus and equal sign for concatenation. As in an example here, instead of just writing full name, split it into few parts, we could have written down full name plus equal last name. Again, whatever you prefer, just make sure your code is comfortable for you to read, to follow, and for other people to use later. Let's have a look if it's going to work out. So we can see John Doe as expected. Now let's see how we would concatenate strings with other data types. So the first thing that we would be using it is some example of integer. Yeah, so we would just need to use conversion function str that is converting string to string data type. Otherwise, it would lead to an error. Let's have a look at the repetition. So what is repetition? Basically multiplication. In case we want to repeat the same thing written a few times, we are writing down the symbol or the word or another pattern multiplied by 10 or any other number that you prefer, and then we get some specific output. Let's have a look at the example of pattern. We have 1, 2, 3, 123. In case if we know we multiplied integer by 3, we would get what? 369. But with strings, it works a bit differently, so we get the same number repeated 3 times. Now let's have a quick look at one of the most interesting part in terms of strings, of collections, etc. I personally love it very much because it's simple, but there are a lot of interesting moments when you can get caught. There are a lot of edge cases that you should be familiar with. So index essence. In case if we want to talk about some characters in strings, how we can access it, we need to understand that we can access characters in string through index. So what is an index? In programming, we know in computer science actually that indexing starts from 0, not from 1. So in case we have the first element, it means that first element of some certain sequence, it means that it's index 0. So let's see what other thing is slicing. So it helps us to take substring from our string, but let's talk about indexing first. We can access indexes of elements starting from 0 or from negative number. In case if it's 0, it means we start from the very first element in our string. In case if we start from negative 1, it means that we are starting from the end. Our phrase, we can see there is a phrase hello world. So in case if we are writing down as 0, we are accessing the first element. If it's as negative 1, we are accessing the last element from the right. So what does it mean? We need to write down these square brackets and put the number. Let's have a look at many examples that I have prepared here. And in case if we define a variable value language and put the value Python there, we would be able to access 6 different elements. But what happens in case if you try to access index that is out of range? For example, 6, index 6, which would allow us to access the 7th character. It would give us index error because, again, we cannot access something that is not in our collection. Let's have a look. You can see it really gives us index. Now, let's have a look how we could access elements with negative indexes. So we can see absolutely the same way, but unfortunately we can't start from negative 0. This is why we start from negative 1, dropping down to negative 6. We would be able to reach all of the characters in the word Python, stored in the variable language, in other words. But what's going to happen in case if you are trying to access element with index negative 7? You might think that it would give us an error, the same one as before, or it might give us nothing. To be honest, it's going to give us the same index error as before. Let's have a look to prove our point, and we can see string index out of range. So please be careful when you are using it. You just need to count how many elements you have in your list, collection, or string, and just not to try to access index larger than this value. Now, one of the most interesting things, slicing. Let's have a look again at the definition of slicing. We are going to have more examples a bit later, but before we used these square brackets just to access one element. Now, in case you try to put a few numbers there, we can access more elements. For example, we can start from some index, end with some index, and use some step. We need to know this very important thing, that by default start is equal to 0, and by default is equal to the length of the string, and step by default is equal to. So let's have a look at the example that I have prepared. 7, 12. So what does it mean? We would start from the 7th index, so it means from 8th element in the string. We need to know that spaces counted as characters as well, so we cannot skip them. So, and we are going until 12th element, but 12th not included. So we have what? WORLD, world, not included in 12 index. Now let's have a look at some common string method that I recommend you to use that can be really useful for anything, for your exam, for your project, just for your homework, etc. Upper, lower, title, and capitalize. Why would we use these methods? Sometimes we don't know or we are not specified, and we need to write down if everything should be capital, if everything should be lowercase, etc. So when we convert the input to something else, whatever we are going to work with, we can easily compare it to the values that we would like to compare. So there is example with Alice, and we can see what's happening if we are turning it to uppercase, lowercase, title. Title means the first word is going to be first letter in the word is going to be capitalized and capitalized. So let's have a look at what's going to happen. Yeah, that's correct. Let's change it a bit and let's see what's going to change in this case. So what is the difference between title and capitalized? Title is capitalizing every single first letter in each word, capitalize only the first character in the entire string. There are also other important methods that we would like to use, especially find, that allows us to find the substring. And it would return us the index of the first occurrence of the substring. So let's say we have hello world and we want to find the world location index where world starts in our substring. In our string, I suggest you to have a look at another one, for example, line ABBA. And if we try the index of B, which would be line find B, print line, print, and it would show us 1. Why 1? Because it is the first index or the second position. But in case if you don't know how many of them are there, so in this case it would show 1. We don't know how many of them there. There is one more method that I'm going to talk more when we are going to talk about lists. It is count B, which would be line count tells us what we have 2 B's, and then we could try to apply some tricks to get the index of the second one, but again it's not worth. You can try to practice it on your own. Let's keep it the way it was before and let's have a look at replace. Quite often it's very useful. For example, some people use dot instead of comma instead of dot. Very useful thing to use, especially when you are working big data sets, so you don't want to manually replace all of the data. You just want to write script. We'll replace all of the characters with the required format. Look, we liked programming, now we love programming. Another interesting thing, quite often it happens to us that we are sending a message to anyone and we are not taking care of the space characters in the end of the message, but the messengers, they're protecting these extra spaces, extra characters, and they're just removing them. I can't say that it often happens with leading white spaces, but it always happens to the white spaces in the end of your message. This is just an example how you can get rid of this, how you can strip it from left side, from right side, or from both of the sides. Let's have a look. And you can see when we're applying the methods, when we are calling method, we are not changing the string directly. We are returning the instance of this original string, but changed in some certain way. We are going to talk about strings not being changeable a tiny bit later. So let's see how we can format them. So we can create strings by using format method. It's quite an outdated method, but some very specific cases could be useful. But again, I just want to mention it because sometimes it's easier to navigate through these cases if you have extremely big text that you want to combine and you don't want to plug all of the variables in. So you would use format, first name, last name. Let's see what it would be looking like. My name is John Doe. Doesn't matter what you're putting in case if you are putting Yuri, you will see that their value is changing anyway. F-string is working in absolutely similar way, and I love using this method because you always can see what you are using. I can put the variable name here, and I know what exactly I'm referring. I know it's always going to be there. You don't need to play with extra commas, extra quotational marks. You're never going to be lost. You just need to carefully use curly brackets. Now we are slowly walking to multi-line strings. So let's see what's happening here. You can use either single quotational marks or double quotational marks to create multi-line. You need to pay attention that there is no tabulation here. It always starts from the next line. So in case if you try to do something like this, let's see what's going to happen. You would have tabulation here. So that's why you would need to use from the very beginning of the line. It's actually not very beautiful. Sometimes you can use it in the next phase, for example, adding slash n. Let's see if it's going to work out. It's added new line. Again, whatever you prefer, as long as your code is readable for other people. And let's quickly talk about encoding. So what is encoding? We know that our values in computer are written down in bytes, then they are converted into bits, then they are converted into different coding systems. Pretty often we are using in keyboard ASCII system. Let's have a look how we would be able to encode or decode our text. Again, so this is to one system, this is to another. Decoded back. Now, let's have a look what is CHR and odd functions. They're very, very important to know. So CHR function would help us to get the character from some random number into what? ASCII. Yeah, so we ask number 65. So what does it do? We can see return Unicode string of one character with ordinal I. So in case if I change the value to 165, what's going to happen? It's going to give me the value of 165, which is this unknown to me value. We can play around with more values. We're going to what? Cyrillic alphabet. We can add more numbers. It could be emojis, or it can be anything else. Maybe some other characters. We don't know it for sure, but I'm pretty sure you can check it later. Let's get it back to 65 for now. And obviously, odd function is converting our value into what? ASCII code number. Let's try to use our emoji from here. Let's try to get the output of this emoji. Would we be able to get it? Yeah, it's going to be this well. And again, if we try to get it from here, it will show us, but depending on it may show, yeah, it's going to show us. You can see everything we are doing. That's correct. Now, let's have a look at some more advanced. So how would we get the len of a string? We would use len method. We can use min and max function that would give us lexicographically smallest to largest character. On other words, it would give us the value with the lowest in case if it's min ASCII code with max highest value. Sorted would return us list of characters count we mentioned before, start and with obviously. What they're doing, checking beginning, ending, is alpha, is digit, is awesome. These are very important methods. I would like you to pay attention to this when we are going to talk about this in a tiny bit. So let's have a look at each of them separately. Len of, obviously pretty similar. The simple thing, what we are going to do, we are going to check the length of the string. So we can see hello world, it is the phrase that has 13 characters. Let's have a look at simpler phrase such as Python. It has 6 characters visually. Let's check if it's true. Yes, it has 6. Now, min and max, these are tricky ones. So we have Python, and the expected output for min would be P, and for max would be Y. Why P? Because P is a capital letter, and lexicographically, P is going before all of other non-capital letters. But beside that, in ASCII code, we know that capital letters are going before non-capital letters. Again, would be P and Y. It is non-capital Y, just in case. When we are moving to max, let's change now Python to P with uncapital, non-capital P, and we have age, which is now max. Why age is max? Because it's going before all of other letters in the word. Let's try to test it again. So we have A, B, C, X, Y, Z here, and you can think what would be the output here. So what would be the minimum? The first value, and we remember it should be what? It should be X. The max would be C. Let's have a look. Min X, max, sorted. It will just return a list. We are going to talk about this in details, but as you can see, it is sorted in this order in terms of its ASCII value. We have spoken about count before, and we can see in case if we try to count how many L we have, we would get 3. We try to count how many O's, we would get suffix, prefix, broken. Pretty similar. You can have a look at this later. It would always return us either true or false. In case if it starts with this value, it would return us. If it starts with correct value, it would return true. Otherwise, it would return us false. Now, one of the most interesting things is alpha, is digit, is all. No. So, is alpha is checking if the string is alphabetical. So it means if it's using just a character such as starting from A ending to Z. Is digit is checking if it's using only characters of digits, and all num it checks alphanumeric string. So basically it's checking if all of the characters in the string, if their ASCII code are in that ranges for each method. So let's have a look if all of them are going to be true. Now let's have a look at a bit more complicated example. We are going to see that all of them are getting. We are going to speak about split a bit later, but I still would like to mention that it returns us a list with all of the string elements separated by some specific separator. For example, here I'm using this separator, as you can see, 2 characters, comma and space, and I'm creating a list with 2 elements. But again, more details when we are going to talk about this. And now splitting by space, and there is one interesting trick that default value, in case if you just want to split it by space, you don't need to write it down. It's always doing it by default. But again, you would have this value, comma, written next to your hello. Now let's see how we can iterate over string. There are 2 main methods how we can iterate over strings in Python. Then, so the first one, we could use direct for loop. As you remember, we were using for I during previous session. Now we are going to work in this similar way. So we remember that loop allows us to iterate through sequences. And as we mentioned before, string, it is a sequence of characters that 10 altogether. So now we are here in what? Sequence Python, and we are iterating for each character in the sequence. So we have how many elements? 6 elements in this sequence. So each character is going to be assigned to each value with each iteration. Again, you can have a look at detailed explanation again, but we know that output of this code would be just 6 lines. Each of them would be individual characters. So we would use it in case if we just want to iterate through elements in the list, in the string. We want to count some occurrences, some special values. We want to apply some different transform, etc. There is some very interesting example here, and we would use what? We would need to check some vowels in case we in our Python. And as you can see, I'm lowering characters in the word text, and we are checking if this is present in vowel. So what would we do? We would just write down in case if the vowel found. There is one more interesting thing. You can use operator to check if some specific character present. Let me quickly remind you, in case if you want to say count, let's say word dot 0, it would return us what? It would return us value of true. Or you can just check what? Oh, yeah, I apologize for my non. I apologize that I'm not sticking to the same quotational marks, but again, I recommend you to stick to it in your code. So as you can see, this is the way to check if there are more than one or at least one appearance of character O, and this is checking it the same way. And another one, it is index-based iteration. So we can iterate for value starting from what? From 0. We set range by default starts from 0, and it goes to what? To length of the characters -1. So we know in Python how many characters we have, 6. So we are going in range from 0 to 6, not including 6, so from 0 to 5. And let's see, character at index 0 is P, and at index 5 is. There is one more. Let's have a look at the example. Pretty same example as we've used before. So in case if we want to convert vowels to uppercase, we would create a new variable result. Again, we cannot change our value variable as we are going to talk about just in a tiny bit. So we are creating new variable results, and we are adding to that our new variable. I convert it to up in case if it's vowel. Otherwise, we are just adding the existing. So, and there is one more advanced way enumerate that allows us to iterate both in indexes and characters. Let's have a look what it would be working like. It would take 2 values and it would create pair of variables, not just one variable as before, but again, we are going to talk about enumerate when we are going to talk about next lesson. And now, the most interesting thing, I was telling you before that it's impossible to change the variables that are string data type. Let's have a look how we can create and why we can't change them. So in Python, they're called immutable data types. Immutable, it means that there are no mutations that can happen to them and we cannot change them. Let's try to change it in this way. As it was an example, let's create some S value example, and if I want to change the first value to non-capital E, I'm going to get, what am I going to get? STR object does not support item assignment. There is another way. Let's try to see if it's possible. S dot replace capital E with E, and let's apologize. Need to use quotational marks. So let's have a look if it's going to change our variable. No, it does not. Why it does not change it? Because again, it returns new instance. Yeah, it returns object. So to make s have e, which is non-capital, what would we need to do? We would need to create another variable s, or basically rewrite the value stored in the variable a. Now we can print it and get the expected value. So again, never try to change the value of some specific character in a string variable, because it is not possible in Python. Now let's have a deeper look at slices. So what are slices? They're quite tricky. As we mentioned before, they work pretty much actually similar, the same way as range function when we worked with loops during previous session. So we have start value, which has inclusive value and which is exclusive, and some certain step. And let's have a look at a few examples, starting from the first one, basic one. We are going to use ABCD example for everything. So what is happening here? In case if we are starting from first index, which is B, are going to the fourth index, which is A, going to include just BCD. What is going to happen if I'm going to remove? So we know that and default value is going to be length -1, so it's going to include now if, as you can see. Now there is all of this again cases explained in the notebook attached in the link below. So now let's have a look. When we don't have the start value, we remember start is always 0, so we are going to go up to index 3, so the first 3 elements ABC. Let's have a look. Full slice, it means that we are going from default value in the beginning to default value in the end with defaults. So this one is pretty much the same as this one, or you can say 0 and 5. Now, negative start. So again, when we talk about negative start, you should be really very careful here. We remember the default step is equal to 1. So when you start from -3, you start +1, +1, +1. And then you are going to what? To -1. So -1 not included. Just see. Again, there are many more examples. This is an example how to get reverse string using just slices. Then when you are using step larger than 1, so what? We are skipping this, B, D, F, etc. Now let's have a look when we have empty result. This is very interesting case because here we have 5 elements only, and even despite index 5 would start somewhere here after all, but we are still trying to get indexes which are larger than allowed one for. So in case of the slice, it just would return you an empty string. No error. And let's have a look what happens if we try to mix values when start is value is larger than end value. The same, it's going to return you nothing. No error, just empty string return. But default step is 1, so it understands. It cannot make any steps anymore. So I'm just going to return empty string. Let's have a look at this example. So what's going to happen? You can't clearly see it, the example, but you can see that there is no first line in the output here. Now we are checking what's happening if we are trying to go step back in the same place. Nothing would happen. We can try to go from index 2 to 0 and we step negative. We can try what we do in case if we want to go to the first element inclusive. So we would need to write down -1 because we are going to 0. But let's have a look what's going to happen if we are going to, we want to go from 3 to 1 in this way using negative step. So we think, oh, okay, we just need to go from this value to -1 with step -1. Let's have a look. Hop, and we are getting nothing. So you should be careful with this step. Why it would return nothing? Because moving from 2 to -1. -1 is here and 2 is here, so you cannot do that. You can try to pick something like -5, but let's see. It's going to be returning pretty much same thing to you. -6 would give you correct value. So again, to get including to 1, you should be extremely careful in this case. Please don't play too much with this thing to avoid any mistakes. And again, single character, and there are a few more examples. Let's have a look at the steps. Just steps equal negative steps in the opposite direction. This one, we are moving from the end in the direction of the beginning, reversing the line as we mentioned before. And again, example, what's happening in case if we try to slice empty string is going to be returned as well. As we mentioned before, out of bounds indices is going to return empty string. Negative value without specified start, and again would just give us reverse string with step the one that you define. So again, you just need to remember that default value for start is equal default value for end. So the sequence and default value for the step is 1. And negative indices with -1, it is stating for the last character. Now, so that was theoretical part that I wanted to quickly cover with you for today's session. And the next thing that we are going to talk about is going to be a few examples, exercises. Again, in case if you want to practice for more examples, more exercises, I will try to leave the link here or in the description with my personal Python course that I have developed on GitHub, where you have a lot of theory, a lot of practical examples and practical exercises that you can try to solve on here. Now let's continue to our session, our lesson, and our examples. So now let's move to our exercises. The first exercise that I would like to talk with you about is going to be repeating the last 2 characters. We are just going to have a simple problem. What I would like to suggest you to work on, just let's create 5 copies of last 2 characters of our string. So what would we do? I have already prepared input string. Well, for now, let's just double check that a len of our input string is going to be larger or equal than 2. And we are just going to create a variable output. And what would we need to do? Input string, we need to create last 2 characters 5 times. And let's have a look what our output would be looking like. And let's start with the example that I have used in my table. Let's use line. And we can see, oh no, that everything is working as expected. Now, the next example exercise that we are going to work on is going to be number reversal, but it's not going to be just regular number reversal that you would just use a simple slice. We are going to reverse just last digit with the first digit in our number. Let's have a look at what would we could do in our program. I'm going to keep our value in format of string, and let's see what we could do. So the first thing, there are many inputs and outputs here, such as example 1 1, 5 5, 11 11, 12 21, etc. So obviously you could do something like n 0, n -1 is equal to n -1, n 0. And let's have a look. Let's try to print our updated number 1467, and we can see what we are getting: an error. String object does not support items. Again, this mistake was made on purpose to remind you that we cannot do it in strings. You could easily do it in case instead of n, you would have what? Instead of string n, you would have a list of 1 4 6 7. In list, it would work out perfect. But again, we are going to talk about list during next sessions. Now let's focus on the solution. How would we create it in variable? So it means that we would need to use these values n -1 and n 0. So we would also need to get the values between -1 and 0. So what would we need to do here? We would obviously need to do concatenation. So what would we need to do between -1 and 0? Between -1 and 0, we know we start from what? First element and moving until last one. And let's have a look at new out. Let's try to run it. 1 4 6 7, and it's going to give us 7 4 6 1. Right, like in the out. But now let's try to enter 11. What's going to happen in case of 11? Working perfectly as expected. Now let's try 12. 12 is giving us 21 as well. Now let's try to run 1. When we run 1, we are getting updated number 11. Let's try to enter 5. We are getting 55. Why we are getting 55? Because we are not defining slices correctly. We are using -1 and 0 twice, even despite that we are not supposed to be using it, because what? We are supposed to use just one number, and we are trying to get 2 characters. Even despite of incorrect slice, we remember that it will just return us empty value. So now let's try to write another solution. What solution we would get? We would say, we would check if length of our number is larger than 2. We could do what? Create this output. If length is equal to 2, we can say output is equal to and -1 plus and 0. And in opposite case, in case if length what is equal to 1 or 0, output would be just equal to n. Now let's try again all of the cases, which are 1, 4, 6, 7, 11. What happened to 11? Something. 11. My mistake. Now let's try 11, 12, and 1, and 5. Everything is working as expected. Again, you can read the description and detailed explanation. But later, link is in the description. Now let's try to check another problem, which is checking if the variable is a digit. And we are going to have a few solutions here. So let's start with the first one. So the next problem, it would ask us to check if the next exercise would ask us to check if the symbol is a digit. Again, there are a few ways how you could do it. The first way, let's use our ASCII code approach. So let's create a variable called digits, where we would put all of 10 digits. Yeah, we know 0 is our digit as well. And we would just try to check if our symbol is in digits. Then we would print. Yes. Oh, otherwise we would print. Let's run the code. Let's try to. Again, for those who want to make the code very elegant, they could do this. Output is equal to yes. And print. But again, the main purpose of this task is to check that you understand how strings work, not the elegance of your code. Even despite it's still very important to check that your code is written in an elegant way and is working again beautifully. Now let's have a look at the second solution. Second solution is quite elegant as well. We are just going to compare our symbol to the values of 0 and 9 in strings as our data type. Again, how the comparison of strings is happening in Python just uses ASCII code. In case if ASCII code of our character of our symbol is between ASCII code of 0 and ASCII code of 9 both inclusive, then it means it is a character. Let's try to run it again. Value of 2. Let's try to run 10. Yes, because it starts from 1, but in case if you try to write down R, it's going to give you no. Now, try to complicate our exercises. There would be total 9 exercises that I have prepared for you. So we are currently at exercise 5. And let's see. I have written this very ugly input and I want to make it look a bit more beautiful. So how would I do it? For the beginning, let's create a variable result that is going to be our empty string where we're going to store our value. Then we are going to iterate for our input. And what we are going to do with the string, we are going to check if the character is not any digit. How would we check if the character is digit? We know that there is a method is digit, but we need to check if it's not. If not, then we are going to what? To add to our result the current character. That's pretty much all. So let's see if it's going to work out. Let's use the example that I have provided in the output, and the output would be world as expected. Now let's move to the next problem, which is called count words in string, which is very interesting. We have a string and we have complicated this problem by prohibiting to the split method, which would make solution of this problem quite simple, but again, we are trying to develop our logic, the way how we work, string values, etc. So that's why we are going to what? We are going to, but again, the next problem is going to be not so difficult. We are going to count words in our string, but we made it quite complicated. Not so complicated, but we made it a bit more difficult than the regular problem by prohibiting to use the split method. It would be way too easy to solve it with using split, right? And we are learning how to work with strings, not with lists. So let's see what we can do. To make our life a bit easier, we can check if our input string would be equal to 0. In case if it's equal to 0, apologize. If it is equal to 0, then we would just print 0 because there are no words. Otherwise, we can say that we already know that there is at least one word in this line. Now let's try to iterate through each character in our input string. And to make sure there are no extra spaces, we are going to strip our line from left and right side. Okay, now we are going to check if character is equal to what? To space, it means that we went through the characters. We are going to increase word count by 1. We're going to guarantee that all of them are numerical values. Yeah. Sorry, not numerical, that they are alphabetical values. So we are going to skip the case if some of them are numbers. So let's assume word count. And let's run one of our examples given here, which was, let's start the simplest one, the cat in the hat. We have output 5 words. The cat in the hat. Another one, the first one, such as events happen very rapidly with Francis Morgan that let's print morning, is going to give us 11. Everything is working as expected. The next problem is going to be a bit more interesting than the previous one and more complicated. As you can see, with each problem is getting more and more difficult. So what we are going to do, we are going to apply some basic math skills and notice some mathematical patterns. We need to calculate sum of sequence, which is written in the next pattern. First number, second number plus second times third number, etc. While we are completing n-1 times n sum of the digits, numbers, where we guarantee that n is at least equal to. So how would we approach this problem? After entering some number n, we would say total is equal to 0 because we need to know the value in the end, and we would create some output variable where we would store the string that we are going to print out. Again, let's check if n is larger than equal to, even despite we guarantee this, but write down pass for now, and let's write down else condition. So what would be else? Print invalid. So we figured it out. Now let's move to the next. So obviously we would need to start with for loop that would start from 1, not 0, and we are going to the value of. So we are doing what? N times n-1. So our total would need to add each term. So let's create a variable. What current term, which would be calculated in the next way. I times I plus 1, such as 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And we say total would be increased by current. And again, we can see that there is repetition of the code, so we can just get rid of this part and just put it here. And current term, we could write down our string value, which is what? I times I plus 1 plus 1. And we can say output plus equal current. Or again, we can replace this code. And now let's see what's going to happen. Get rid of this. And let's say output is going to be cut off by the last element just to avoid any confusion. And let's say output in the end would be equal to the total value, right? The one that counted in the end. And we have print. A bit confusing situation. So what we do, we get rid of this plus in the end. We can even apply strip to get rid of this value, or we can just write down -2, whatever you prefer. And let's have a look. What was the example? Let's start with the basic case, which is 2. The output should be equal to 2. For 4, it would be equal to 20, which is working as expected. And here I have provided trace table so we can see how our values are changing. We are performing what? 1 times 2, which is equal to 2 times 3, which is 6. And you can see that we are adding them together, 2 and 6, we are getting 8. Then we are adding what? 8 and 12, we are getting 20. Then we are adding 20 and make it 13. The next problem is going to be very similar to previous problem, which allows us to calculate upper, lower cases and spaces. So let's see how we would be able to do it. Again, this is very similar to the exercise 6, I remember, where we were counting the number of words. Now we are just going to check the case of our value and compare this to the space. So let's start. At the beginning, we would need to create 3 constants, 3 variables, I apologize. For what? For lower, for upper count, and for space count, which are equal at the beginning, and then we would iterate through each value in our input stream, and we would be checking. If our char is up, we are going to check upper count plus equal. If our char is lower, we are going to what? Lower, increase by 1. In case if it's space, we are going to check space count. Now let's print all of them out. Let's start with the first phrase, the cat in the head. So it says that this one lower is 13 and therefore 4 space. But I would like you to pay attention to the next case. H space A. What do you think would be the output? This is upper 0, lower 2, space 1. Space cannot be upper, so you shouldn't be worried about the order here. Many people could think that space should be the first one. Okay, it's right. But again, you shouldn't be worried about checking and starting to check it from up. And finally, the last example for today, we are going to work with removing duplicate characters. What we are going to do here, we are just going to remove all of the characters that are repeated more than once. And we are going to remove all of the spaces as well. This is very common trick that you would be using from many of the problems in your future. But let's start with creating our empty set, string with unique character. What we are going to do, we are going to go for character in our input string, and we are just going to check if our character is not space. Again, you can use not space or you can use char, not char is space. And what else we need to check? That this character was not met before, that we did not see it yet. So what would it mean for us that we did not see it yet? That it's not in unique characters. So we say char not in unique characters yet. And in case if it's not in them, then we need to update our unique chars by writing down plus equal char. And you can ask me, but you said before that you cannot update the characters. But again, let me remind you how I'm saying that unique chars is going to be rewritten as unique chars or characters plus chars. So what does it mean? Creating a new variable where I put the value of unique characters and char or character, whatever I prefer to call it. This is again the way how non-static variables work in Python. And now let's check print unique character. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A, B, B, C. A, B, C, D. Everything is working. So again, today we've covered pretty many things related to strings. We covered string creation, concatenation, repetition, indexing, common string methods, formatting, multi-line strings, string encoding. We covered many different techniques that we are using for strings. We also had a look at 9 different exercises. So I'm thankful to everyone who watched the video until this moment. Don't forget to go to the comment section and to leave your comments. Don't forget that there is still a giveaway going on. Don't forget to like the video and see you next week. Bye bye, take care.